Well, I think we can begin being respectful of everyone's time.
Very well. So welcome everyone to our second session of Reflections of On the Courthouse Lawn. I'm Barbara Foster, on the board of Sumner Hall and also with the James Taylor Justice Coalition. And we are very pleased to have Artura Jackson joining us again. As you recall, Artura is a public historian with the Maryland Capital Park and Planning Commission, and her focus is on the Black History Program. So we are pleased to get started, and there'll be plenty of time for people to ask questions. And if there's nothing else now. I will also introduce you to Jada Aristide, who is helping coordinate this and handling the technology part of our presentation today. So with no further ado, welcome back, Artura, and we look forward to having a very stimulating discussion as we did last time. Thank you.
Awesome. And before we begin, I just wanted to note that there are features with Zoom that we can utilize. So if you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature. You can ask questions in the chat as well. You can turn your video off or on. And if you are not actively speaking or asking questions, we just ask that you mute your sound. Thank you.
Artura, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you guys for coming back. We only have 8 so far, so hopefully I didn't scare too many people away from my last time. I'm just kidding. I appreciate you guys making time to spend with me this evening. So in our first session, I read this, and I'm going to do it again because I want to encourage brave spaces as we do this process. So this is an invitation to brave spaces. Together we will create brave spaces because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be a brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. So that's just to encourage you that questions are welcome, and we're going to get through this work together. So I'm excited to talk with you guys this evening. I'm going to do things a little bit different. We're going to go through the chapters tonight. Thank you all so much for your understanding in the last session. I truly appreciate it, and things are looking up for my family. Mostly everyone has recuperated, and we've sent my loved ones, we had nice farewells for both of them, but things are getting better, right? Things are looking up. So I am going to go over the chapters, but I'm not going to go like kind of how we did before. Is there any questions before I get started that you all had from the last session that you thought about while reading the second one, or that you would like me to address before we kind of get into the groove of it all? No questions. That's cool with me. If you think of one, be sure to drop it in the chat. So this session will kind of deal with the second half of the book. Jada, you can go to the next slide. And so, like we've stated, we're doing, I think, the intro. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I believe that we're going to go over this. You can leave it here for a while, Jada. So we're reading the second half of the book, and the second half talks a little bit about the history of lynching, but really talks about the process of reconciliation. And so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to address the themes that we addressed last time, and fingers crossed my videos work. So if you guys can join me, if you have your book with you, I think it begins in chapter 6. and double check, make sure, yeah, chapter 6 is where the second half begins. And there's some things that I want to highlight for you guys in this chapter, starting with page 119. And I wanted to get you all's thoughts on one of the things that I picked up from this reading is that we have to investigate to give the victims a voice. And she talks about that in two different instances. She talks about it in relationship to the race riots of 1921 and the Rosewood Massacre in Florida and the Tulsa riots that happened. She also talks about the struggles and the failures. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of get you all's thoughts on, has the United States, and this could be a simple answer, or it could be a technical answer, has the United States dealt with reconciling with race or reconciling with racial terror? I kind of have the answer, but I wanted to get some feedback from you all. Yeah, they haven't. I understand they have not. And one of the things I want to highlight is how she talks about President Clinton in 1994, how he fails to even address the issues of slavery. And the reason why I want to highlight that is because we can't look at the events that Sherrilyn Ifill is talking about without looking at what led up to them, right? And so most African-American people who live in the United States are descendants of formerly enslaved people. And so I think her putting the part of Clinton failing to address, to apologize for slavery, kind of highlights the problem that we're having, right? Because if we haven't apologized for the initial sin or the initial issue, then there has to be some catching up that has to get done to get us to the next point, to get us to the point where we can even deal with addressing lynching. And so I think that is important to think about as you all are working towards, addressing the lynching of James Taylor and any other racial issues that have come up in the past. I want to also look at page, I think 123. And if you guys are taking notes, you guys can, I know it's being recorded. So if you have questions, feel free to, ask them now. We can go back and watch it later. But on page 123, she talks about reparations and what that means, right? Because one of the things that has always been a question is, should African Americans receive reparations? And it's a hard thing. And after I reread this book, I had a different feeling because I personally am pro reparations. But when I read her definition of what reparations are, I don't know if it's an achievable goal here in the United States. And so at the bottom of the page, she says, the promise of reparations may also be misleading. Law professor Naomi Azarai identifies as a paradox at heart of the idea of reparations. They are intended to return the victim to the state they would have been in had the violation, and I'll turn to page 24, not occurred, something that is impossible to do. And so that is something I want to highlight, that there, according to Ifill and to the law professors that she quotes, reparations are, for African American people, may not be obtainable in the way that we would think. There is no amount of money or land that can address 400 years of trauma, 400 years of being brought to another country. And so I think that we have to keep this in mind when we're doing that work. Does anyone have any thoughts on that before I move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I think she says two other things that seem very important to me. One was that there is no use making an effort to go back to where things were before the lynchings, because they were not, the relations between the races were not good at that time and not something we want to go back to. So it has to be forward looking. I think that's important. And I think the other thing she emphasized a great deal was that reparations must be local. I think here in Chestertown and in Kent County, we have to think about what can be done right here and not pay so much attention to whether Clinton or anyone else in power has said anything that is meant to make things better.
Oh, you're reading my mind, because I was going to talk about that later on. So you are on the ball. That is true. She does highlight the fact that it has to be at the local level, that it starts with the community. It starts with each person who's here. It starts with initial steps, and that you can't depend on a bigger force to address it. So you are on the money on that one. And I think we're on 125. I think her also on page
I
25.
guess my mom wants to say something.
Oh, okay, sure.
It struck me that it's so relevant today in the Eastern Shore because just very recently, the council in Easton decided to take down or remove the Talbot Boy memorial. Here in Chestertown, we had, I think, probably too much of a discussion about whether we should even put Black Lives Matter on the street on High Street. So that in terms of just reparations that don't mean actual physical money, we're still behind the times a little bit, or there is resistance, surprisingly so. And so the shore is still fighting those battles.
Absolutely. You guys are awesome. I'm so excited. I'm looking forward to our discussion because you guys are hitting all the points that I have highlighted on my little sheet of notes, which I appreciate. And that's true. It is. I think we have to, like we said, like I agree with Eiffel that reparations are not possible, even though like that's something that like I said, I had championed before, like reparations were necessary, but I don't think it's possible because you can't return a group of people to that particular state. It's not something that's just an easy fix. Money won't fix it. And so we can't, reparations are kind of complicated. And there are people who will be pro reparations, and I understand that as well. But I think what you all are talking about is reconciliation, which is super important. What she highlights throughout the second half of the book is, what does reconciliation look like? Like, how do we get to this point? How do we move forward? I think on page 24, she actually gives an outline to reconciliation and what I want to, or what could possibly be reconciliation. Pat, you have your hand up? No. Oh, you're just having, okay. And I think that it's important for us to not look at this as the guide, but also a way to give us some ideas, almost like as a way to bounce off of it, because I think that there's no one solution that's going to fit every community, just like how Alice, I believe you guys shared that, you struggled to vote if Black Lives Matter should be on the street, right? If we're struggling for that we have to address reconciliation at the most basic level of how we interact with things. We cannot say this is a one fit model. And even the work that Brian Stevenson is doing, after rereading the second half, not that I question the work, but I think that the work that it has to begin in the community, like it has to start there. There has to be a desire for the community to change, because you can say we're going to honor those who were lynched or who were terrorized by racism, but if you don't have the goal to do it, then it kind of is futile. So yeah, you guys covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about. You guys are ahead of me. Let's see, what else did I find? Undoing structural racism could have to do with providing financial opportunities for those who have I'm going to read the rest of your comment.
Oh, yeah, it could have to do with providing financial opportunities for those who have been unfairly discriminated against. So I guess there is the difference between reconciliation and reparations, and working in policy that could provide funding for frontline communities or something. I guess sometimes I think money does help.
Yeah,
Just recognizing the
resources, right? I think we can look at them as resources, and that's something that I wanted to talk to you guys about. It's something I think in the latter chapters of this section, but how she talks about, I think it's in the, we'll get to it. I promise. I have like a whole set of notes. But I think we're on to a good theme that reconciliation and reparations are two different things, but they have relations. And for us in the United States, I think we have to consider both of those as possibilities. And she says on page 129, but financial reparations cannot take the place of other holistic reconciliation efforts. Litigation has its limitations. The ability for victims to tell their stories is limited, but rules and procedures and evidence. The relief sought must be described in terms recognized by law, usually money or some other form of injunctive relief. The participant in litigations are usually a narrow slice of the community affected by the relevant events. All of these features of litigation can be a hindrance, the kind of dynamic interactions between and among Blacks and whites that are critical to any meaningful reconciliation effort. And I have wondered if you think about the lynchings at Matthew Williams and George Armwood, some of those people might possibly, well, not the actual perpetrators, but people who may have witnessed it are still living. And how, as a community, as you guys are moving forward in this work, how do we address those things? How do we, it's not like the Holocaust where, it was right afterwards and we could identify the people who were perpetrators of the crime. It's a little bit different. We're in some instances 100 years removed from these events happening. One of the things that I think that she talks about here is the use of the law. And I think that although we can't perpetrate or we can't get the perpetrators, I think we can create laws to protect the victims. So the law still has a valid role in that. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about that?
What kind of laws could actually heal the harm caused by that?
I think we can pass laws, well, maybe policy. I don't even know if it's laws. One of the things that I want to address is the relationship between African Americans and the police, right? I think that there needs to be, and this is my thought and only my thought alone, there needs to be training and policies put in place that teach law enforcement how to interact with African American people, how to navigate those spaces, and that when they're violated, that being a police officer or law enforcement doesn't protect you from being persecuted or prosecuted for your actions. And so I think those are things in place, but also making laws where discrimination, because there's still discrimination, that it is, illegal or outlawing it, and putting laws into place that will promote growth and understanding. Because I think, we know about Brown versus Board of Education, and that's a big one, but it took us years to be realized. Alice, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think discrimination happens inside people's brains and reactions. So laws don't really address, they can say no discrimination, but if you look at a situation, being you, the police officer, and you immediately focus on the African-American person in that situation rather than the white person, be it drug taking or drug selling or assaulting, etc., they are acting under their, I think we have a image, or we have a mindset that says more easily someone is more able to have done that than another person. Okay.
Mhm.
So laws can't really attack that problem. And that's what, to me, systematic or some racism in this country sets on, is that we have an image in our minds. Black people have it, white people have it, or Asian people have it. We all have it. And it speaks to protecting your own, feeling other people are responsible, etc.
Yeah.
And I don't think legislation is the way you go.
I just kind of disagree. But that's okay.
Huh?
Okay.
You can go ahead.
Well,
My partner, my fellow daughter here feels differently.
Well, we just passed Anton's Law, right? I mean, making people responsible over here on the Eastern Shore. We passed some great legislation, actually, thanks to a representative on the Western Shore too. Does anybody know much about that? I mean, we had a modern lynching is what they call them, right? If a police officer puts somebody down and basically they die because they can't protect themselves and for no good reason, that's a lynching. And their family and many people fought to have those officers have laws passed so that at least families can find out and make those officers responsible for what they've done. I mean, there was a horrendous inability for that family to protect their child. And they went a really long way. And so that's a victory for us. That's through the law.
Are you talking about Anton Black's situation?
Yes. Anton's Law is now, it's Anton's Law.
In Goldsboro.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the family and the Western Shore representative and other folks here from the Eastern Shore who testified, got that passed, right, Ms. Jackson?
I'm sorry, I have a chiming clock in my house, so you guys heard it probably the last time, but it goes off every 15 minutes, so get ready for a couple of chimes. I do agree that laws can be passed. I think, but to your mom's point, we have to deal with our implicit biases. We have to deal with what makes us uncomfortable when we're walking down the street and we see someone and we're not comfortable by the way that they carry themselves. We all have biases. It's one of those things that's kind of hard to get over and move from, but we all struggle with them. But I think when you sign up to become a public servant, you have to be conscientious of your actions and how you deal with them, right? You can't just say, okay, because I'm afraid of this person, now I'm going to shoot them. And if we're holding people accountable, are you shooting or interacting with them at the same rate that you do people who look like you, right? Because that's one of the questions that we can bring to the floor. I know someone else had their hand up.
I had my hand up.
Okay.
Because I think you can I think you have to work on two fronts. You have to work with people with individuals at the level in which we've been talking so far. And you have to look at institutions and make sure that their policies are not inherently racist or have racist consequences, which may or may not have been in the minds of the people who started them. You can get into trouble with people individually who say, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, I'm not racist. And in that case, you can work with them, but you also can try to convince them that this isn't personal. that what you're talking about is something that's systemic.
Absolutely. I think that it's a complicated thing. It's not, I wish that there was like a 1 + 1 = 2 type of solution to this problem. We would have been there years ago. But I think that it's these type of conversations and saying we have a complicated system. And she talks about institutions later in the book. And I really want to, we're going to address that as we go on. I do want to highlight a caption or a section on page 131. She says, thus reparations must focus on meaningful change in the community and in an ongoing dialogue and action. So there's not one event that we can do to create reparations, but we can do that by having conversations and having people in place and to do things like what we're doing tonight to begin that process. But we have to make sure that everyone's at the table when we begin those steps. I'm going to head to chapter 7. I don't have a lot of notes from there, but one of the things, or I do actually, it was 2 pages. My bad, guys. One of the things I wanted to highlight was on page 133, and she's quoting someone named Godwin Phelps, and she says, Godwin Phelps cautions reconciliatory storytelling cannot be private or confidential. The real change of truth telling and the willingness to engage with the fellow community members in the hard work of constructing a new community based on the full accounting of the past. The new community is one in which formerly excluded stories become a part of the history, identities, and shared experiences of all the residents. And what I gather from that is that we can't say it's not that bad. We can't say it didn't happen. We can't continue to say those things if we want to reconcile our past. We have to be willing to listen, even if it's painful, even if it's something that makes us not look the best that we can look. We have to be willing to have those conversations and to hear people's story, because I think what I've gained from her work and just interacting with people who have experienced racial violence or racial trauma is that you want your story to be heard. You want to be validated. You want to know that you're not imagining things. Like I shared with you guys early on, I went to Salisbury University and I experienced a lot of things there. And I knew what they were. Could I say, this is a racist event? Yes, but I had to prove it to someone, right? I had to, when I made a complaint, it was the burden for me to prove that this event happened to me. And so I think we have to validate when someone says things have happened, right? You can't just say, oh, well, that person wouldn't do that, or, oh, they're not like that. We really have to be willing to listen and willing to engage in the process, even if it makes us uncomfortable, and even if it involves people we know, because we're not perfect. We're not perfect people. I have friends of every color, and I have to often remind them, hey, maybe we can't do that. Or if I'm going too far, hey, Artura, pull yourself back. That's a little bit, too far for us. So it's the accountability that is super important, but you have to be willing to listen. And I think that is one of the most valuable things that she talks about in this book, is the ability and the willingness to listen. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Yeah, I agree. I think that it's important. Like I said, again, accountability is a must. And then really this chapter kind of talks about accountability. One of the other things that she highlights is, and you guys have already kind of like tackled it, which makes me so happy because you guys are already doing this work, accountability for people from the shore. On page 138, she talks about how the shore culture, right? Like the shoreman, who that person is. And we've talked about that in the past. The nativism that we see occurring when these lynchings are happening, that's not an excuse, that it's not a justifiable reason to interact in this way. And that even though the Eastern Shore has a sense of nativism, closing ranks or limiting the exposure to the events is not helping the reputation of the shore or the people who live there, both Black and white. Does anyone have any feedback for that? Thank you, Jada. Appreciate it.
I really agree. I mean, I think that, you know, to not, to that there's a whole population of African Americans on the Eastern Shore, and their voices are, and just as you said, their stories are really important. And so you can't just say white people's, you know, voices and stories are more important, and therefore let's just all shut up about it or something, right? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, but also, I mean, one of the things that Eiffel talked about earlier in the book is that one of the biggest contradictions and one of the biggest criticisms of the shore was their nativism. Like, we handle our own, we deal with our own, you don't know our way of life, you don't know our culture. And really that's a hindrance in the process. It's a hindrance in the way that they progress through the situation, because the nativism doesn't allow them to, one, learn about other people, to grow or to expand or to have a different experience. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of where you're from, but you don't want that to limit how you interact with people. Like, you know, people love the state of Maryland. Our flag is on everything, but the world is bigger than Maryland. And so I think that's what she's trying to address when she's talking about, you know, nativism and the struggle that the shore had with nativism, because you can be a proud shoreman and admit that there were events that happened in the past that were not right. They're not. Go ahead.
Oh, I absolutely agree with what you all are saying. I was really struck by the both this section when she talks about Polly Stewart presenting, and this stony silence that she received, even though she had, you know, been here for many years. The section that really spoke to me in this chapter was her discussion of, well, she quotes on page 133, Teresa Godwin Phelps, and the role of silence as a crucial component of the technology of oppression. The oppressor demands silence of both the victim of the oppression and of the passive beneficiaries. Only one story may be told, the one constructed by the oppressor. Counter narratives threaten the power of the oppressor. So I feel like that really plays into both the nativism that you're discussing, and it's just so powerful, even, you know, to this day. I mean, when people say, "Oh, we don't, you know, why dredge up the past? So we don't want to talk about this," and yet that's what's keeping this all in place. I mean, just, you know, another topic that makes me very angry is this. This whole politicization of curricula and critical race theory, and just how, you know, worked up people are getting about, you know, what teachers may and may not teach, and that's, you know, that's just another representation of of the same issue playing out. Oh, well, no, that we're not telling that story. This is the story, and don't you dare go telling that other story. It's just the challenges that we're living with today.
That is an amazing point. I went last time we met, we discussed some things, and I thought about the critical race theory, and I wanted to ask that question, but I was like, well, maybe I'll hold it to the next time. But you're very right. What they're doing with critical race theory is the same thing that Eiffel is talking about. It's saying that that perspective is not one that we're willing to welcome into this space, and that because of that, we're not going to address it. We're going to exclude it, and we're going to create a system that will not allow it to be heard. And when you say that, you're silencing a group of people, you're silencing their history, their heritage, and their past. And one thing that I want to impress upon you guys is that, and I'm not speaking for all African Americans, but no matter the circumstance, we're still Americans. And this is a part of our lived experience. So the pride that people have we still have a patriotic nature, right? It's not that we African American people walk around angry with America, because it's our home. It's the home that we know. I remember when I was in high school, where I live at, there's a large population of people from Nigeria, and they were like, well, like there's this horrible joke. You all were stupid enough to get on the boat and we flew over, which is an awful, awful joke. But it was something that we heard a lot in high school, right? And so what I come to realize is I know no other home. No one in my family, no one that I've ever known, that anyone I know has ever known, has known Africa. I have no connection to that place. America is my home. This is the only home I've known. I'm born on the 4th of July. How more patriotic can a person be to be born on the 4th of July and be a historian, right? So this is all I've ever known. And so although there's been trials and tribulations, African American people still have pride in this country. And the exclusion of critical race theory or Black history or whatever people want to call it is a denial of our experience and our presence in a place that we only know. We only know this. So when we decide to remove those conversations or to eliminate those things, it really, it's offensive, but it's also like we still have miles to go before we sleep in terms of that. And I appreciate you Jenny bringing up Polly Stewart. I never got to meet her while I was at Salisbury, but I know of her work and her legend. And I interacted with her collection, her vast documentation of the lynchings when I worked at the L. Knapp Center as an archivist assistant. But what happened to her was true. Eiffel is not making it up. She actually kind of doesn't highlight how horrible Polly Stewart's experience was in Salisbury. It was very rough for her. She was essentially blacklisted and not welcomed anywhere. And even until her retirement, there were people who did not welcome her in spaces because of it. It was taught to us in our classes. When we dealt with lynching, we understood that talking about it had consequences, and Polly Stewart was the biggest example of the consequences that we would see because we know how they treated her and what they did to her. And all she tried to do was tell the truth and bring forth the information. And even to the point where, even where I worked at, there were some ways of suppressing her. Her collection wasn't available to the public. That's changed since we had a change in leadership, but there was a way to suppress her truth because she was committed to document it and she never apologized for it. And I find that to be exceptionally commendable. But when you do this type of work, you have to also realize that there are consequences. And Dr. Small talks about that, right? And I know Clara Small, that's one of my mentors. And what she was saying was very true in this section, that there is the risk of being socially lynched when you do this type of work. That people will be critical of you. There were things that I talked about when I was doing research in Salisbury that I had to be very careful how I expressed it or shared it, because I knew that there were people who would know those people and they might not be so happy with that. And so that is a real situation. And Dr. Small retired because of a student harassing her. A white student harassed her, and that led to her retirement. So because she was talking about something that the student didn't want to hear, and he decided to almost basically stalk her. So it's real. There are consequences for speaking up and being an upstander. Do you guys have any more questions about this section or this chapter before I move on? Alice, go ahead.
Well, I only mentioned the article Sunday, I guess, or Monday, I'm not sure, depending whether you read the paper or the online news. New York Times article about the superintendent in Queen Anne's County who recently resigned. And at least the New York Times represented her pathway through her job was in many ways, she was successful, but she was basically run out of town because of her attempt to talk about these issues, to talk about racism, to address issues, address diversity in the high schools, and the political right, and the takeover by the school board. All I'm saying is that it's not history, it's today.
Yes.
And
It is.
it's still with us. And I just find it incredibly depressing and shocking, but it's true. So we're not necessarily progressing in this issue. We may be stepping backwards.
Yeah, that's very true.
My mom is just as an example, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I've been doing this work for a little while, and my mom's progressed, right? I do believe that, and that's an accomplishment for me. Honestly.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's the willingness to listen. I mean, this conversation could have happened 20 years ago. Could we have been talking about this 20 years ago? Probably not. And it's a very real thing, but I think we have to be courageous in the work that we're doing. And it's easy to say be courageous, but you have to understand the benefit of it, and the commitment that comes along with doing this type of work. I think we hit all the things I wanted to talk about. We definitely, hold on.
Artura,
Yes.
one of the things that Cheryl and Eiffel made clear to me, if it hadn't been clear before, was that this truth telling that she talks about ought to be done not by whites alone, but with Black participation. And she does talk about listening, but you have to have Black experience to listen to. And one of the things that we wrestle with here in Kent County, I think, is the difficulty of getting into a space where you have a participation by both of the races. And I'm simply asking you what, if you have any words for us in terms of helping to make that happen.
I wish I had that magic solution. Oh man, I could sell it, ball it up and sell it for millions of dollars. But I don't. I think that you can't give up, right? You cannot quit. You cannot say, well, they didn't come to this event, so I'm not going to do it again, right? We're sitting here in this book club. We can look on the screen and we can see who's here, right? And we can see who's not here. And that can be hard, right? To deal with that, right? Because we want everyone to be present. We want everyone to participate in the conversation, but everyone's not here. And so you can't be deterred or undetermined. You have to be willing to try again. You have to be willing to reach out to them and engage that community no matter what. And actions speak louder than words. It can't just be a sign or a placard or something that makes you feel good. Sometimes the work is going to be uncomfortable. Sometimes it's going to be difficult. But validating the experience, right? Because if someone says, I experienced racism, don't say, well, was that person really racist? Or did that really happen to you? Say, okay, tell me what happened. How can I help? How can I be of assistance to you? How can we try to resolve it? How can I be an ally? How can I be an advocate? Because that, to me, that to a lot of people goes further than a sign or, the righteous thing to do, right? It's you taking a step to end it. And she talks later on about the institution. And so we're going to get back to that. I see Barbara has her hand up. Barbara, you have your hand up? You have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry, I had to unmute. Artura, maybe you can help us, and I think Peggy was looking for some help also about what are some of the reasons that African Americans will decide not to get involved in some of these new conversations. And I understand about other people saying, oh, did that really happen? No, that didn't happen, or that sort of thing. But there must be other things. And secondly, what do you think that we, as people who find this important work, could possibly do to make it more comfortable or more encouraging or whatever for African Americans to be a part of this?
Okay, we're having a great discussion. You guys are getting into the thick of it. I love it. I think to answer your question, Barbara, it's an issue of trust.
Yes, it is.
It's an issue of trust. I will say, even though I don't feel this way, I'm always consciously aware that if you did it to me once, you'll do it to me twice. That I have to be aware of that. That even my closest friends, some of my closest friends are white people, and that sounds really stereotypical, and it's not, but I'm always consciously aware that I'm their Black friend. Why am I their Black friend? Why am I being invited to this? Is this a photo op? Even with people who I can bare my deepest, darkest secrets to, who don't have the same complexion to me, I have to always be conscientiously aware of that that is a very real possibility for me, that this person could betray me, that they could turn their back on me, that things could go south. And it might not be from anything that has happened, but I think last time I talked a little bit about generational trauma. It's something that we're taught. Not that we hate white people or we don't trust white people, or there's a lack of trust, but your parents want you to live. Your parents want you to survive. And you have to be able to navigate these spaces safely. You have to be able to get to survive it. So you have to be aware that if in the right situation, if the situation is right, this person may turn on me. This person and their culture has mistreated me in the past, and I cannot forget that, because if I do, it could happen to me again. And that is the real, that is the honest truth. That's the best way I can describe it to you. It's kind of like there's no words, there's no lesson, but you just know. Always be aware, always be cautious, always make sure that you're doing the right thing, because you don't want that situation. I'll give you an example. My best friend in college, we were driving down the street. She gets pulled over for having a tail light out. When I see the police, I change. I have never been arrested, not a criminal. I've never even stolen a piece of gum. But I know that things can go south, right? And she was in her car. We're driving back we were downtown Salisbury going back to my apartment. And she starts reaching around in her car. And I grabbed her and I said, stay still. Do not move. And she's like, what's wrong? I was like, don't move. Because when they come up, they're going to see me and they're going to see you. Keep your hands on the steering wheel, because that's what I know to do. That's how I know not to move when I interact with the police, to comply with everything they say, even if I know I'm not wrong, because I don't want what could possibly happen. I'm educated. I come from a middle-class family. I shouldn't fear the police, but I know that can happen. And when we got back to my apartment, she and I had a discussion. She said, why did you freak out like that? I was like, because you could have got me killed. You could have really gotten me hurt. And she didn't understand it. And we had to have multiple conversations going over with what I thought could have happened to us, and why I needed her to be still and not move around and dig behind her, because I know what could happen. I know people who it's happened to. So I didn't want that to be me. And I was a Black person with a white person in a place where that isn't always acceptable. I had to think about those things. So that is sometimes the reason why there is this mistrust, because that is not a fear that you might face in your everyday experience. And to answer the second part of your question, Barbara, how do we create spaces where Black people feel safe? I think it's honoring their experience, realizing that it's their story and that it's their moment and it's their situation, and that we have no, we're here to help bring the story to light. We're not here to be a part of the story, because it isn't, even though we're a community and we're both equally participating in it, they are the ones who've experienced the trauma, who've been victimized, and you have to be willing to let them tell their story and figure out ways that we can assure them that their story is safe, right? Because what if I don't trust you and I think you're going to take what I told you and use it against me, or you're going to take it to benefit you? I may not be willing to participate. I hope that answers the question. Does anyone have any
Thank
questions?
you.
Oh, no problem. Does anyone have questions to follow up behind that, or would like me to expound more?
I do, Artura. You're answering that on a very personal and a very deep level, and I fully understand the lack of trust and the reasons for the lack of trust. So let me ask you something that's much, it's just much more surface. There are things that we would like to do in this town, small steps that we would like to take to begin to rectify situations. An example is there's information and markers all over town about the role of white colonists here in town, and very little public information about the role of the Black community. And one of the things that the James Taylor group would like to do is eventually put up an historical marker that simply is there somewhere around the courthouse, telling in a just a bold, factual way exactly what happened to him. And so my question is, can those of us that are interested in doing, is there a benefit in those of us who are interested in doing this, sort of marching ahead and doing it, even if there is not a groundswell of local African-American participation in this? Would it be a valuable thing to do, and then perhaps be meaningful in the community? There is another marker that has been put up at the place where African Americans first set foot off ships onto the shore to go and be sold. They just put that up.
Okay.
And there it is, and I'm delighted it's there. Can we move ahead on this, or should we wait until we feel that there is a groundswell in the Black community for what we'd like to do?
I don't know. So I think it's like probably like a land acknowledgement. Is that
Yes.
what it is? That was going to be my suggestion, is first with the land acknowledgement. But I would look at every one of those signs that you talked about that represents the colonial history or the early American history of Chestertown, and counter those signs with signs that talk about either the enslaved people who lived there. Some of that stuff is public knowledge. You can go and look at how many people. So if it's, I'm giving you an example of someone in my county, Gabriel Duvall, who was a Supreme Court justice. He's from my county. Okay, we talk about him. He has a house, but who lived there? Who are the people who made it run? Who are the people who worked there? Can I say their names? Can I do that? Those type of things. I think you have to be willing to be in it for the long haul, right? I don't know if there is ever a way to achieve it. I don't even know if I've known any group that has ever had a perfect form of reconciliation, to be honest. And I'm not laughing at that, but that it's going to take time, it's going to take work, but it's showing up. It's going to the school board and saying critical race theory is important, and the James Taylor Justice Coalition stands behind the implementation of critical race theory. We understand that the police brutality is real, because those are things that affect them. I think sometimes groups struggle, because we struggle with it even, and I'm an African American, I work in a program that focuses on Black history, and there are people who don't want to talk to me, right? Because they're like, you're smart, you have this education, you have privilege, which I do, but I had to work for it, right? But what I've learned this is showing up, saying, yeah, I know that we could do things better. What can I do to make it better? What can I do within my circle of influence to change what you feel is wrong? How can I make you feel safe? But I also you have to think about the socio and economic stumbling blocks that African American people face. If I don't have adequate healthcare, I'm probably not worried about my history. I'm trying to live. If I don't feel safe walking down the street, I really don't want to come to your meeting because I'm worried about the police officer who might shoot me. And those are some of the boundaries that you have. And I think even if the person, even if there are people who are not perfect, and no one's perfect, right? We're not perfect at all. But if there are people who are willing to come make the first step, sometimes you have to be willing to say, thank you for coming, following up, showing up when they're having something. If you know that there's an event, if there's a Juneteenth celebration, okay, let's make sure that the James Taylor Justice Coalition is at Juneteenth. How can we be a leader in the Juneteenth celebration? What can we do to make sure that they have equal access to this, that this day or celebration is a success? Those are steps, but it's not going to be right away. It's going to take time. And honestly, there's no like magical mediator, but bringing people into place, like what we're doing right now, to kind of start those discussions and to be a bridge builder, to say, hey, what's going on? How can I help? And maybe it's having a separate, she talks about in the book, we have to acknowledge, yeah, that's fine. We have to acknowledge kind of the difficulties of, what do I want to say? We have to acknowledge the difficulties of doing this work is hard. It's just not going to be easy. And we have to be willing to do what it takes and be in for the long haul. And that's okay too. And it's okay not to have the answers, and it's okay not to be perfect in this process, right? Because you're changing the situation, you're changing the narrative, you're making things a little bit better, one step at a time. So you're moving in the right direction, but there's going to be pushback, because think about all the things that have occurred leading up to this one moment where we want to change things. And although you didn't commit the act or another person didn't commit the act, it's still there. That underlying tension is still there. One of the things that Sherilyn Ifill talked about in her book was the lack of representation, right?
Yeah.
If I don't see myself present in places, I don't want to be a part of that. I have to see someone who looks like me. And you don't want to have a mascot, right? And that's not the best word, but a spokesperson or a figurehead, because she talks about it when she talks about the 19 people who wrote the letter to the, I think, Baltimore Afro-American, saying that like people in Salisbury weren't racist. And I kind of laughed about it because I had the opportunity to study some of those people and to understand they were doing that to protect themselves. They were not, that letter could have been written by someone else and they signed it. That was a move for self-preservation, not for we really believe this, because the actions that they take following that suggest that they don't feel that way about it. They go back into their silos, they advocate for their community, but there is no process of reconciliation. There is no boundary. And the letter came from the Black community. It was not written by the white community, right? In Salisbury. It was the Black people saying, oh, our neighbors aren't that bad. Please leave us alone. You know, basically raising a help me sign. Because that's essentially the message that they were sending when they mentioned that. Let's see. What else I want? Is there any other questions? And we can, this can go however you guys want it. It's no perfect way to do it. So if you want to talk more about it, if you want to discuss it, that's what, if you walk away feeling if you have a better understanding after this, then that's what I came here to do. So we can move on, or we can stick with this, whatever works for you all.
Well, I did have just a quick statement kind of going back to the question that was posed earlier as to why are a lot of Black individuals not at these events, these type of events, or really active in the community. And I think you kind of briefly touched on this, but I think my personal opinion is oftentimes in these conversations, we're talking about events that are happening or have happened. And we want Black input. However, oftentimes these events are still happening. So they're still going through these traumas that are still happening to them. And then they're asked to come and, you know, be a part of an event or be a part of a program or be a part of an initiative. When they go back home, you know, they're still stuck in those same experiences, or they're still having those same experiences. So I think that's one reason why you know, you don't really see a lot of Black individuals being active in these conversations, because oftentimes these conversations don't lead to political change or change in legislation, or change that will readily or soon have take effect in their lives to make their lives better currently. And so, or that's kind of what I've gathered kind of throughout the work that I've done over the years, over my undergrad years. And also, I have a question
Okay.
regarding kind of the marker that Christy brought up. But my question would be like, what is the goal? Like, what is the goal that I guess you have in mind? The effect that the marker would essentially have for the community. Will putting up a marker, you know, to honor James Taylor or other lynched victims, how will that serve the community, both Black and white? Is it something that will help the community reconcile with their lynching history? Is this something that would be seen as offensive to, you know, either individuals? You know, is this something that you think will be the end of a conversation? Is this, you know, a Band-Aid on, you know, an open wound? You know, just how would you see a marker for or specifically, I guess, a James Taylor marker kind of integrating into the community? What message would it send to community members?
I think it falls into the category of truth telling. And everything that I've learned from Sherilyn Ifill and everything that I've learned from Brian Stevenson is that the truth telling is an important place to start. Of course, it's not an end. It's like writing Black Lives Matter on the street. It's just the barest beginning. That's the most concise answer that I can give to you. And I have certainly heard from members of the Black community that they are afraid that this would somehow raise a situation which won't hurt us in the white community, but might seriously hurt them. And that's fearful to them. And I do understand that. But I think I believe Sherilyn Ifill when she says that truth telling is important. And as we've been working for James Taylor, there are a lot of people in this community who really didn't know the bare circumstances of his lynching. It seems to me it's important that we know that. It's one of those many things that we were not taught in school that need to come out now. But I am aware that there are people that feel that this could be hurtful in some ways to the Black community because the situation is so very much the same as it was 100 years ago.
Yeah, I think you, Peggy, you're right. There's a cost, no matter what the cost is and who pays for the cost. And what I was thinking when you said that is that James Taylor was someone's brother. He was someone's son. He was someone's best friend. He was someone's, you know, the person who told the funny jokes. He meant something to someone. And I think that Black people, personhood is important, right? Because now we know we know more about George Floyd. Like, we know he was a dad and he laughed and he had this personality, but at first he was kind of demonized, right, as being this person who resisted. And so how do we bring these people to the forefront and keep their humanity, right? Because like I shared in the last session that like I was in class with George Armwood's niece, right? That was her uncle. Like she didn't know him, but that was someone who her family cared about at some point. And his legacy is that he was killed via racial violence. We have to figure out how to bring personhood to Black people and to make them feel safe. But I think to Jada's point, there are a lot of socioeconomic and things that are happening that really limit Black people's ability to be fully present in this type of work. Barbara, you have your hand up.
Yes, I would add the reasons for putting up the markers. As you said before, you know, you come into an historic town, a colonial town like Chestertown, and there's a lot of history that has been brought out and has been labeled of the white people's experience. And except for maybe one small thing for Black veterans during the Civil War, it's as though no African Americans lived here or live here. And so when I see people going around on these tours, visitors from Chestertown or any town, I personally feel that you know, it's been remiss that they're only looking at one part of the history. Why shouldn't they look at other parts? It doesn't always have to be a bad part, but it could be people's accomplishments who are African American or whatever. That's included because it's as though treating them as though they're invisible. And, you know, that's a step away from treating them worse.
You just brought up some really great ideas, and I know Peggy had asked me for some suggestions. And so one of the suggestions I just came up with is to work with someone who's willing from the African American community to create a Black history tour of Chestertown, to talk about the places and spaces that they existed in and to highlight them.
It actually, Armand has done that. If anybody knows Armand, he was my neighbor for years. And so it has been created. So folks who have newly come into this space who want to participate should recognize that and put that forward as, you know, promote it.
Or even expand it, right? Like if he's already created the tour, okay, what are those markers? What's missing? Do we talk about education? Do we talk about religion? Do we talk about tradition? Because they're people, right? They have, even though African American people are victim or have experienced and been victimized by racism, they have culture, they have tradition. One of the, it could be the smallest, sweetest little thing that you might not even think that's important that could prick their heart, right? It's Halloween time and people always, cemetery tours. And I lived in Salisbury, so I know people love a good house tour and they love a good haunted tour. Like that's their thing, and they go for them. We don't have that much here on the Western Shore, but I saw it when I was in college. And one of our multiple of our cemeteries have in our county have markers that indicate that these people had traditions that they brought with them from Africa, right? So the growth of yucca on graves is directly correlates to Africa, the position of things like that. So where do you see Black culture hidden in Chestertown? One of the things that one of my coworkers does, which is sometimes it annoys me, but he goes around and he looks at old buildings and he finds fingerprints in the bricks, because most times those were African American fingerprints because they were the people making the bricks. And if you saw someone who could have been in your ancestor's fingerprint, that might prick your heart to say, I was here too. I was there. I helped build this place. You know, the things that they grew, how they cultivated things, having restorative activities. So one of the things that I would suggest is, and resources are different, right? So I work in a big government agency and we're required to do a lot of stuff that is restorative, but restorative genealogy, public archaeology, right? where if there's an African American space where you can come and we can cut a square and we can dig and we can find artifacts. Imagine finding something of someone who you, even if you're not from there, that you find a piece of their history in that, you know, that piece of dirt. Or you go to the cemetery and you see a tradition that was bought with them, or you see something that highlights who you are. That's representation. That's bringing forth voices that aren't present. And those things, when you bring those forward, I think people will come, right? There's no magic formula. I wish I knew it. Like, oh man, I can get 25 people to an event. But when I do restorative genealogy, or I do something about how to get past 1870 in the census, that will touch people, because 1870 is a year that the census, I think they're ruined or something. And a lot of Black people can't get beyond that date, right? And they can't figure out where their families come from. Or can I transcribe something that's related to the Black community so that it's available to them? It's doing little small gestures and acts that will really show commitment, because a sign is a sign. Although they're wonderful, do Black people even go in those spaces where the signs are, right? Like, are they going to that place where the land recognition is? When the sign for James Taylor's place, is that a place that they're going to go to? How do you all, thinking about it, how do we hope to honor James Taylor's life? Do we have a ceremony for him? You know, are we gonna, you know, one of the things I saw we did with the State Department, like the State Highway Administration, is one of our Black cemeteries was a highway was put through it, right? Which happens all the time. And so they were doing some construction, they found a body that was left, right? They told us they got all the bodies out when they did it, but they did some construction work, and there was multiple bodies, but there was one that they could fully put together, right? And they knew who it was, and they were able to tell us her age. They did the DNA, where she was from, all that stuff. And what we did was we had a funeral for her. We had a memorial service for her. We don't know her name. We have an idea of, like, based on where she lived, you know, the environment that she was buried in, who she was, but we had a ceremony for her to honor her life. And we don't know who her relatives are. We have no idea who this woman was, but we rededicated her body to the earth, and we remembered her, and that she was a person, and that she had a story, and that she was someone's loved one. And people came out. It was a full crowd of people at this church to honor this woman's life. And we have no idea who she was, like, no clue. We can only trace her DNA and estimate who we think she is. But that meant something to someone. And that showed that we're not just here to do, you know, show work. We're here to do the actual physical work and to honor those lives of those people. And so how can we do that for James Taylor? When you guys get ready to put the marker down, how can you bring him not to life, but to honor the person that he was, despite whatever he was accused of, and despite the way that he died, because he was a human. And we all want people to remember us when we're gone. We all want people to think of us positively. So how can we help facilitate those things? And other people who've experienced racial violence, you guys, you know, I know you guys are part of the where you guys are based at, Sumner Hall, is related to veterans of, I think, the Civil War. What did veterans experience when they came back? What happened in World War I? Is there a way for us to honor veterans the way that they lived their lives, and the sacrifices they made for a country that did not fully acknowledge them as acknowledge their personhood? How can we do something because when you acknowledge my personhood, then I can recognize your humanity. But it has to kind of, I can't just be a page in the history book. I want you to see my humanity, because all those people were people who were loved, who had families, who had lives, who could have potentially been other things. And they were willing to, if it's related to veterans, make the sacrifice. But also James Taylor, he was accused of a crime, you know, like, who knows the circumstances that led up to that, or what his life could have been if he had had justice. So those are just some things to consider.
Artura, thank you so much. So much of what you've just said really touches my heart. And I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
It's okay.
I really appreciate what you've just said. Personally, I'm not in favor of rushing putting up a marker. It's hard to kind of be patient and slow, but if we're trying to bring our community together, and a major portion of the community is not at the table yet. I don't think that we're at the point yet where we just sort of in frustration just throw up a marker. I mean, maybe in a couple of more years, but really, I mean, even though we've been working on this for 2 years, we're really still just getting started. I mean, personally, I'm disappointed that we're not doing the soil collection on Saturday. I thought that was, the plan. I missed the last meeting when I guess it was decided, we'll know there's, other stuff, too much going on, and we're not ready for it. But I can, trust and believe that, okay, well, we're not there yet. I mean, we have this commission hearing in February. That's going to be fantastic. We have the essay contest. I mean, I really want to get the kids involved. If we can get the teenagers involved, that's when things are going to happen. And I'm really hoping that the essay contest will bring that group in. And so perhaps after, with the essay contest and the hearing behind us, okay, maybe that will then be the launch point for the soil collection. And then that, we just, in my years at the LMB, I learned, okay, you trust the process, and it's, I'm in favor of letting things, continue to develop, at least for another little while here. So thank you.
It is a process, and it's try and fail. You fail forward, right? So we're going to fail forward. We're going to, even if we have to struggle to get to that point, we're going to try it. And if it doesn't work, okay, we'll do something else. And there's so many thoughts that come to my mind, and I know we only have about 4 minutes left. And this was an amazing discussion. It went by like that this time. But you guys you're doing amazing work. And it takes people to be brave. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, Jenny, is what if we take the table to them, right? So we always talk about the seat at the table, right? Everyone wants to have a seat at the table, but if the table is not in my space, how can I have a seat there? So what do we need to do to bring the table to them? How do we do that? And we need the seats. Like when we're the ones who are advocating for them, we want to sit at the table. It's their table. Let's invite them to invite us. When we bring the resources and we bring what we have to them, okay, now how can we be of assistance to you? How can we help you? How can we navigate this space with you? What's the immediate need? Is there a problem I can help you solve? Is it you're afraid that the police are going to remember that you were at a protest? Okay, if that's the case, then we need to train the police differently. We need to address that simple, because fear, like Jada said, fear is a big part of it, and not feeling present. And if I'm afraid that something could happen to me, or that there's consequences, that I could lose my job, that someone could think, oh, I think that white people are racist, I may not be willing to participate, because that's not worth the consequence. Like showing up to an event is not worth the consequences of the repercussions that could possibly come their way. And that's a real thing. And we're still in Maryland, and even though, our state is considered progressive, our tendencies have not changed. The same problems we faced 100 years ago, they just have different outlets now. So I'll open it up for any other questions you all have, any final thoughts that you guys have. I want to be respectful of your time and not hold you over. But I really enjoyed talking with you guys. This was a really amazing discussion this evening. We didn't even need a PowerPoint. Like I had other slides for you guys, and we didn't even get there because you guys really dug deep. You asked real questions. You challenged me, and I hope that I have helped in some way. Anyway, I'm not, this book club ends today, but I'm always an email away, and I'll send my information to Barbara and some additional readings and some video. I'll send a whole bunch of stuff to follow up that we did get to cover. But know that you have my support, and even I'm not from Kent County, but I'm rooting for you guys. I'm rooting for the work that you're trying to do, and I think that you're in the right direction. Nothing that's hard has ever come easy, right? Like, it's never been easy when things are hard. So just know that that is a real thing, and that being here tonight is planting a seed, and it's going to blossom and bloom one day. So just know that you're moving in the right direction. And I'll turn it if you guys have any questions. So feel free to ask them.
I really appreciate your, attention towards the power of culture and ceremony, and want to recognize with the folks here that we did do a Decoration Day reconciliation in 2010, 11 years ago, and honored the soldiers that fought from Kane County who are buried in the cemetery. And that work, I would love it if that work continued. I did it with the African American Schoolhouse Museum at the time. The Sumner Hall hadn't really happened yet. But there's a wealth of sort of experience there. And I think it's history that the cultural institution can love and embrace. And, so I just appreciate, Artura, your, focus on that. Thank you.
Oh,
And the whole thing.
That's an awesome idea. Even a Decoration Day program or Memorial Day, that whole concept of it has roots in the Black community, and acknowledging that and just figuring out ways to interact. And like I said, if you ever have a question, you want to brainstorm, I'm an email, a phone call away. And know that people across the state are doing the same work that you all are doing. We're doing it here in Prince George's County. It's happening across the state, and no one is more ahead than the other one. I've worked with multiple different factions, and everyone struggles for the same thing. Our meetings look similar to yours in our lynching chapter in Prince George's County. So yeah. Thank you guys. And I'll turn it back over to Barbara. You're mute.
Hello, okay, am I back on?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. And thank you, Artura. And I hope that when you're thinking of a place to take a little break from the big metropolitan area, that you'll come visit us and give us a little heads up on a weekend. We'd love to meet you in person here.
Absolutely.
And, never fear, your phone number and all your contact information is in our Sumner Hall Rolodex, and we'll definitely be back in touch. So
Thank you so much, Artura.
yay.